had somebody ask me for a top 5 tips on squatting, so things that I feel people need to work on when it comes to squatting. Now, the point is we need to be able to squat. People that say that squats hurt your knees, go see a physio. You've got reasons why it's happening. You squat every day. You sit in your car, that's a squat. You sit on the toilet, that's a squat. You sit at your kitchen table, that's a squat. Every time you sit, you're squatting. It's trying to figure out what squat is best for you, and that is a very troublesome thing to do. Now, I'm assuming that the person who asked the question was just talking about back squats, because generally when people think of squat, it's a bar on your back and you're going to squat. So I'm going to run off of that premise, but I am going to get to it. So here's my top 5 tips for squatting. My first is stop bouncing off your pelvic floor. Especially guys, we have very narrow hip structures. We could still have well-developed glutes and have a narrow hip structure. So if you find when you're squatting that your TFL or your hip flexors or your low back SI joint is taking the brunt of everything, and it's not your hamstrings, it's not your glutes, it's not your quads, most likely you are bouncing off your pelvic floor. Now, what is your pelvic floor? If your pelvis, okay, was a bowl, there are muscles inside of that bowl, and we generally refer to them as the pelvic floor. It's part of your core musculature, your diaphragm's on top, pelvic floor muscles on the bottom, obliques, TVA, abs, erectors, all that kind of stuff. How you know you're bouncing off your pelvic floor is, generally speaking, you cannot squat ass to grass. Okay? That's pretty much all the way down. I've got a fairly neutral spine. If you can't do that with weight on your back, it's probably because you're bouncing off your pelvic floor. Now, what does that feel like? What does that look like? Generally, it's hip pain. Okay? Now, your pelvic floor, if you and this is worth trying because you're going to understand what I'm talking about. If you take your hands over top of your hand and you go boom at arm's length, it's about the pubic bone or maybe a little bit lower. If you were to squat, you had to keep your hands there. That's your pelvic floor, and that's when you're bouncing off of your pelvic floor. Okay? You're bouncing off of these muscles because they give you a good spring. Because you haven't learned how to open them and actually load your hamstrings to use the global muscles, or the big ones, or the prime movers that you're intending to work, which are your quads, your glutes, and your hamstrings. So, first advice, take weight off the bar. You need to get deeper, okay? Generally powerlifting style, parallel, which means your hip crease is lower than your knees, to be able to stop getting through your pelvic floor. So you need to practice that with body weight. And I have a video talking about the importance of being able to hold the bottom squat position. So can I just plop down? I don't care about your posture. Can you plop down unloaded, weight in your heels? Okay, that may mean your depth is here, it doesn't matter. Can you plop down here? Learn to hang down. Because you need to just practice what getting through your pelvic floor feels like. Then you can do it loaded. So again, do not bounce off your pelvic floor. Generally speaking, pelvic floor, when people stop, and how I know, they'll tell me they have hip pain here, or back pain back here in the squat, or knee pain because they can't get proper through the knee and get a good range of motion in the knee. Bouncing off pelvic floor is about this angle where knee is that high off the hip. Okay, so my hip is about that high off the knee. When there's a good 6-8 inch difference, you're likely bouncing off your pelvic floor. You can learn to stop bouncing off your pelvic floor by box squatting, putting a bench between your legs, something that allows you to just take the load off for a second and then get back up because you're going to release. Another way of fixing that is my next tip, okay? Which is you have to push your knees out. Now, a lot of people have flat arches and their feet collapse, and it is horrifying to watch somebody squat with weight on their back and their ankles collapse and they do something like this. Okay? Or the ankles give first because they have flat arches. Flat arch, squatting, I'm squatting, and just doing it all wrong. So what people that have flat arches tend to do, and I have flat arches myself, what we'll tend to do is we'll take a really wide stance to compensate because the knees are caving in. So I feel if my base of support is wider, I'm going to be better at that. It's like, you know, ankles still collapsed first. What happens when the ankles collapse? Knees go in. So what do you think you need to focus on? Knees pushing out. If you can't push your knees out and keep them in line with your toes when you squat, your glutes are weak, okay? Outside hip is weak. Too much weight on the bar. Take some weight off, start building those abductors, okay? You can build them just with lighter weight squats and making sure that the very first thing that you do, especially if you have ankles that roll in, is narrow your stance, which I know makes the squat harder, and it may work on this pelvic floor issue too. You have to push your knees open, spread the floor, create some space in here, and then try to get lower than your pelvic floor kicking. So, boom, knees. Boom, knees. And then eventually you can work on getting down nice and low. Okay? If you do not push your knees out, you're hooped right from the get-go. Now I'm not talking knees out, I'm just talking most of the pressure should be on the outside of your shoe and in your heel. And that's where I'm going with this, is that my weight should be in my heel as I open. Okay, so knees open, weight in the heel, boom. And then you squat. What I find goes wrong when I tell people to put weight in their heels, they lift their front toe. That's wrong. What you need to do for your knee health, especially if you have shearing knee pain or clicking or popping when you go down in the squat, you need to grip your feet. It's probably one of the best ways to build your arch. So when I unrack a squat, okay, say a back squat, I'm going to set a fairly narrow stance because I know that my ankles are going to collapse. The first thing I'm going to do is push these knees out as I start heading down. But actually before that, the first thing I did was grip the floor. My weight's not in my toes, my weight is in my heels, but not so much that my toes are off the ground. Crush your big toe into the ground the entire time. If your feet cramp, it's a good sign that your arch is weak and you need to work on it, okay? So, tip 2 is pushing your knees out, weight in the heels, okay? Now, the next one is, should you break from the hips or should you break from the knees first? And I read some study talking about, they took hundreds of squatters, and they found that the best ones that had the best squat mechanics broke from the knees slightly before everything else. Now, what do I mean by break from the knees? You could emphasize hips first. I'm not saying that that's wrong. Box squatting, sumo squatting, all of that stuff, again, that's a variation of a squat, but we're talking a traditional back squat. The first thing that should happen, again, heels, knees out, all that good stuff. I should bend from the knee a little. I'm not talking this squat, okay? There's too much of that going on too. Break from the knees, then slide your butt, knees out, 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 and get out of it, okay? Bend from the knees first. Especially if you're lordotic, and especially if you have back pain when you back squat, do not be doing this. Don't turn it into a good morning right from the get-go. Break from the knees just slightly before. It's still knee, and then hip knee, hip knee, hip knee, ankles along for the ride. Now, in a back squat, especially in a back squat, happens in a front squat too. The other thing that I know that goes wrong, especially for myself when I throw 300 pounds on my back, that's where I really notice it, is I may be perfectly set up, pushed everything out, broke from the knees first, did all the stuff I'm telling you to do, and yet the first thing I did with my torso was this. It's just like a deadlift. If you go away from your legs in the first 3 to 5 inches, you're screwed. If you fall forward in the first thing that you do in a squat in the first 6 inches, you're screwed. This is not a good morning, this is a squat. And this is still even for low bar. Try to maintain the most erect, tall posture you can, depending on whether you high bar or low bar the squat, and I'll get into that in a second. Yes, you're going to end up more at a 45 or more at a 30-degree angle. I get that. Doesn't mean you should fall forward. Most coaches will tell you to keep your chest up when you squat. I don't think it's the right cue. It doesn't tend to work too much. I can still be perky in the chest and bend forward. So what do I try to do when there's a ton of weight on my back? I imagine there's a wall. that my shoulders are against. And the first 6 inches of the down, again, pushing my knees out, weighting my heels, breaking from the knee first. Can I keep my shoulders against that wall? I may, because of the mechanics, end up at 45 degrees. That's fine. But if the first thing I did was bend forward, I'm screwed. Push the knees out, break from the knees, keep tall in the shoulder, the first 6 inches, then yes, I understand you're gonna have to start leaning forward, especially on a low bar squat. On a high bar squat, it should definitely be upright as much as possible. So that's my 4th tip. First 6 inches, stay shoulders back. Okay, trust me on that one. The 5th one, okay, and this is the most important thing, coming from training hundreds of people in the general population. I'm not talking champion powerlifters, I'm not talking anything. I've trained high-level jiu-jitsu, martial arts, all that kind of stuff. I work with powerlifters. If you want to become a powerlifter, stop listening to me. I don't look like a powerlifter. If you're a dude in the gym trying to get better, your knees hurt, everything hurts, fine, this is what I'm trying to tell you. Learn how to get good at every kind of squat. If a back squat hurts your back, it hurt my back for a long time. I gave it up for 10 years. I went back to front squatting, went back to goblet squatting, went back to the hundreds of other kinds of squats there are. The Smith machine is not a squat. Okay? Learn to do every other kind of squat except a back squat if it hurts your back. If a front squat doesn't work for you, don't use it yet. But my point is, get good at all squats. Learn to become good at all of them. You're going to have a favorite, you're going to be beast mode strong at one of them, that's fine. So let me walk you through a ton of variations of squatting. Okay? In the back squat, the traditional squat, there's basically 2 different kinds. Yes, you can play with stance and do all of what you're going. Basically, there's high bar and low bar. If you don't have big meaty tissue, okay, on the back, rear delt, mid trap for the bar to sit on, it most likely is just going to put wrist pain and all the weight into your wrist, so I wouldn't recommend low barring. If you have a lordotic posture like I do, low bar isn't generally a way to go either because it's going to tip you forward, even though I do low bar. High bar. You never put the weight on C7. You always go just below the dinosaur bone. Okay, that's a high bar squat. High bar squat allows you to stay more upright. Okay, so again, boom, knees out, knees first, keep those shoulders against the wall, sit, sit, sit. As soon as my knees start caving in, get out of it. Please, get out of it. Okay, a low bar squat, which is what I prefer. I find a high bar squat, the weight is really pushing down on my spine. I hate it. It doesn't allow me to use my hips, and I'm a hip hinger, I'm not a really squatter. That's low, it's very low. All my weight's on mine. Now that's going to preclude that at the bottom, yes, I'm going to be leaning over more, but doesn't mean the first 6 inches I don't travel down the exact same way. This is much more natural for me to perform. It's also safer on my back. The point is you have to get good at all the different kinds of squats, and you got to figure out which ones work for you. So here's some of the other variations. Front squat. If that was a back squat, sitting on the front is a front squat. I have a video. Here's the thing. Throat first. Cross grip. This is the bodybuilder grip in a front squat. All the rules apply. Weight in the heels, toes gripped, knees out. Break from the knees first. First 6 inches, you're very upright. In a front squat, you're trying to stay upright. I don't necessarily love cross grip front squat. I think a clean grip or strap grip. T-Nation, Kristen Thibodeau, clean grip front squat. Look at it that way. Great video. And if you have the flexibility, perform that one. If not, use wrist wraps. Okay? That's a front squat. That's just some of the squats. What if I bring boxing? Doesn't matter the height of the box, you can adjust that. Now I can do a back box squat, a front box squat. All the rules apply. Weight in the heels, knees out, first 6 inches on back. Right? Front box squat. Okay. It's a box squat. That's just traditional stuff. overhead squat I can't really perform because of my wrist issues. Okay. If you tend to have wrist issues, go look at the Delray bar, D-E-L-R-A-D-E. Eventually I'll buy one. Overhead squat. The premise of an overhead squat is that the bar stays behind you, not behind you, in line with your ankle, and I'm going to squat this way. Okay? Even just doing it with the doweling is really great thoracic and shoulder extension exercise. I do it just to stretch. The goblet squat. For people that bounce off their pelvic floor, a goblet squat can be a miracle worker. Take a really heavy dumbbell, take a kettlebell, doesn't matter. I can hold it this way, I can hold it that way, I can hold it on the horn, I don't care. It's just against your sternum. And you're trying to, again, knees out, weight in the heels, stay really tall, get lower than your pelvic floor, get out of it. A goblet squat can work a lot better for somebody. Half racked. Offset racked, different weights on a kettlebell. It's just variations on the goblet. Okay, come over here. Zercher squats. Everybody hates Zercher squats. I never love them either, but if you're going to perform a Zercher squat, I really recommend having a fat bar for it. It's way easier on the elbows. All the rules apply. Heels, knees out, break from the knees first. Stay tall for the first 6 inches, get out. Okay, fat bar. Zercher squat. The safety squat. Okay, the SS yoke bar from Lead FTS. Best damn barbell you'll ever buy. There's a lot of population that I train. I train some 50-year-olds, 60-year-olds, stuff like that. Can't squat. They can't get their arms back here. Women without good enough shoulder or front delt development really hate front squats. They're really painful. Again, I don't care what kind of squat you do. Get good at all of them. But just squat. And squat good depth, all that stuff. I have a really big dude I train. He's about 300 pounds. Just a monster of a guy. Strong as hell. Yes, he's got some overweight. Hated squatting because he was so tight in the chest, can't get his arms back, feels like a pussy because he's not squatting and doing leg work, stuck on the leg press. Safety squat will save everything. I almost start people on the safety squat once I know that they can do the goblet and all the body weight variations. Head through. Here's why. I can take the safety squat, and if I'm really bored, squat with my hands in my pockets if I want to. Not that I would. I hold the camber. Still hold the back squat, but it's nice and comfy on the shoulders. You can take the handles and could do good mornings, do all kinds of stuff. Best $400 bar you'll ever buy. Point is, you sit on a toilet every single day. First, get to the bottom of a squat. Go watch the video on that. Then get good at every other kind of squat. Any questions, guys? From the comments.